Many people think workplace accidents happen out of nowhere, but almost always they start with small lapses. Lack of training, absence of protective equipment, and decisions made on autopilot can turn into real tragedies. The idea here is not to judge anyone, but to show how prevention makes a difference. And that is exactly what you're going to see here today. So go ahead and leave your like, click the subscribe button below, and let's get started. At a port in Poland, it started with a curiosity that seemed harmless. A man got too close to the dock because he wanted to see a ship leaving up close. The problem is that during the maneuver, one of the mooring lines came under heavy tension. This type of cable is made to hold tons, and when something goes wrong, the force released becomes a real danger. In seconds, the cable snapped loose and whipped back toward the dock. The man ended up being hit by the protective rubber attached to the cable. It was a violent impact, but he was very lucky. Before reaching him, the cable struck the dock itself, which greatly reduced the force of the blow. Even so, he fell to the ground. According to reports from people who were there, if the cable had hit his body directly without that prior impact, the outcome could have been much more serious. Port areas are not improvised tourist spots. There is a reason for barriers, warnings, and safety rules. Ship maneuvers require training, safe distance, and respect for protocols. Sometimes, getting too close just to take a look can be very costly. The accident happened during a routine workday in a newly opened factory. It was early afternoon when a worker was performing a simple task, something that was already part of the daily production routine. He was carrying a bag of powder and needed to pour the material into a mixing machine that was operating at that moment. As he approached the equipment, something went wrong. The bag ended up being pulled into the rotating part of the machine. In a matter of seconds, the worker was dragged along with it. The equipment continued spinning for a few moments, which made the situation even worse. Colleagues who were nearby realized what was happening and ran to shut off the power. The rescue was immediate. Authorities were called later that same day to investigate the circumstances of the accident. The factory had been operating for a short time, which raised questions about training, safety procedures, and proper guidance for employees. The company stated that it would cover the medical treatment costs. Industrial machines present real and constant risks. Investing in training, maintenance, and proper use of personal protective equipment is not bureaucracy. It is what separates a normal workday from a tragedy that changes lives forever. This case happened during an activity that seems simple and routine inside an industrial environment. An operator needed to clean a machine with a cloth. The problem was that the equipment was not fully shut down or isolated from power before the intervention. In just a few seconds, the situation got out of control. The machine started operating unexpectedly, and the worker's hand ended up being pulled into the internal mechanism. The situation then became desperate. Soon one employee arrived to help, and shortly after, several others joined in to manage to save that man's hand, turning the situation into a task force. It was one of those accidents that does not involve a rare technical failure, but rather the absence of a basic safety procedure. What seemed like a common construction scene almost ended in a serious accident. Two bricklayers were working on different levels of the building, each focused on their own task. At a certain moment, one of them decided to get rid of some wooden planks and chose to throw them down to the lower level, believing the area was clear. The problem was that it wasn't. Just below, another worker continued his job, unaware of what was about to happen. The planks fell all at once and hit directly in the head area. The impact was strong enough to frighten everyone nearby. Luckily, the outcome was not serious. The bricklayer who was hit was wearing a helmet at the time of impact. The equipment absorbed much of the force and prevented injuries. The helmet, which many people see as an exaggeration or an inconvenience, was what prevented a tragedy. On construction sites, risks literally fall from the sky. No task is too simple to skip protection. A sad story happened inside a scrap warehouse and involved a sequence of dangerous decisions that almost ended in tragedy. A man worked at the site operating a machine used to compact waste and recyclable materials. At a certain moment, he got off the vehicle and decided to enter the machine itself to better organize the material before compression. The problem is that this type of equipment is not designed to have someone inside. Even so, he entered without fully shutting down the system or isolating the machine. A few seconds later, something went wrong. The compression mechanism was activated, and the moving part began to descend while the man was still inside. Routine and haste can create a false sense of control. The person thinks it is just a quick step in, adjust the material, and step out. But all it takes is one wrong command, a failure, or even an automatic movement of the machine for everything to get out of control. This type of operation requires clear protocols, complete shutdown, system lockout, signage, and proper training, in addition to the use of personal protective equipment. The video lasts only a few seconds, but it shows one of the most tense moments ever recorded at a construction site. Two workers were monitoring an operation when a huge crane began to fall right into the area where they were standing. The structure weighed about 68 tons and was being slowly lowered by another larger piece of equipment. Suddenly, a steel cable supporting the crane snapped. From that point on, there was no warning and no time to think. The structure plummeted straight toward the two workers who were on the ground, observing the procedure. The reaction was purely instinctive. They threw themselves to the sides at the last second, narrowly escaping. The images show the crane hitting the ground with force, while the two managed to get up and walk away. Those who watched the video were shocked, because the difference between walking away and losing their lives was a matter of inches. Other workers appear in the background, watching without being able to do anything, since they were on a higher level and did not control the equipment. The accident only became public days later when the video began circulating on social media. According to the city's firefighters, the two workers were not injured, something considered almost unbelievable given the weight of the structure involved. Inside a plastic products factory, during the work shift, the person responsible for the site was performing an activity near a pressing machine alongside an employee. At some point during the operation, he decided to enter the machine, but ended up getting trapped. The force of the equipment is extremely high, designed to mold resistant materials, and there was no time for an effective reaction. The employee next to him even tried to do something, but it was already too late to avoid the fatal outcome. The accident had a strong impact among the workers and immediately halted the factory's activities. Emergency teams were called, but they could only confirm the worst at the scene. Days later, family members and acquaintances gathered for the farewell amid great emotion. What stands out in this case is that the victim was not a newly hired or inexperienced employee. On the contrary, he was the owner of the place, who knew the environment, the routine, and the risks involved. This shows how familiarity with the machine can create a false sense of control. The danger remains there, even when everything seems under control. A video shows a scene that happens more often than many people imagine. A man was using a portable ladder to perform a simple task, one that seemed quick and without great risk. The problem is that he ignored basic safety rules while climbing. In a few seconds, the situation got out of control. Without maintaining proper support and with his body off the ladder's axis, he lost balance and fell violently. Falls from ladders are among the main causes of serious workplace accidents. The risk increases when the ladder is not inspected before use, when it is supported improperly, or when the worker tries to reach something beyond the safe limit. Another common mistake is climbing without maintaining 3 points of contact, meaning 2 hands and 1 foot or 2 feet and 1 hand, always supported. A ladder is not an improvised support or a shortcut to save time. Every detail makes a difference, from the condition of the steps to the way of climbing and descending. Using the right equipment in the right way prevents falls that can result in fractures, time off work, or something worse. On the eve of a long holiday weekend, a cement factory was carrying out an internal demolition when something went out of control. During the job, everything seemed to be going well until the silo began to fall toward the machine. The impact was enough to bring down the structure and cause a sudden drop in the region's electrical supply. Although no one was injured in the accident inside the factory, the consequences spread quickly. The power outage directly affected the high-speed train line that connects important cities. In the middle of the afternoon, passengers began to get stuck in stations right at the time when movement increased because of the holiday. Trains stopped running on some sections and confusion took over the platforms. Many people only found out about the problem when they arrived to board. The authorities responsible for energy mobilized teams to try to restore supply, but the process took hours. Meanwhile, some trips continued in only one direction. In other cases, passengers had to get off the trains and continue the journey by bus or use alternative rail lines. Tickets were offered at no cost, but that did not prevent lines and delays. In the end, a single error ended up not only putting workers' lives at risk, but also affecting the lives of many people. A video circulating on social media shows one of those workplace accidents that sends a chill down your spine. The scene takes place inside an industrial environment where a woman was operating or standing near a roller machine, usually used to process fabrics or metal sheets. In a moment of carelessness or safety failure, her arm ends up being pulled into the moving machine. In a matter of seconds, the rest of her body is also dragged and begins to rotate along with the equipment in a continuous motion. Those watching get the impression that there will be no time to react. Luckily, something prevented the worst. The machine ended up shutting down or losing power. The result could have been tragic, but in an almost unbelievable way, she escaped without serious injuries. Even so, the scare was enormous and the risk was real. Industrial machines leave no room for error. 1 second of distraction, a missing guard, or an ignored procedure can put an entire life at risk. Equipment like this needs physical barriers, accessible emergency stop buttons, and above all, proper training for those who work around it. Employees experienced a tense moment inside an industrial environment when a worker was performing his activity normally and ended up getting trapped in a machine that was operating. The situation quickly worsened since the equipment remained on and any movement could make the scenario worse. When they realized what was happening, coworkers reacted immediately. Instead of panic, there was action. One of them ran to the control panel while another tried to keep the worker conscious and away from the most dangerous parts. The decisive factor was stopping the machine. As soon as the system was shut down, the risk decreased and the rescue could be carried out more safely. The worker was removed from the machine without serious injuries, something that could have been very different if the reaction had taken a few more seconds. That is why it is important for machines to have emergency stop devices in industrial equipment. These systems exist precisely for situations outside the norm, when there is immediate risk to people or to the machine itself. During a normal work routine in an industrial environment where winding machines operate continuously, a worker was near the equipment, monitoring the process, when a distraction was enough to change everything. Part of his clothing ended up being pulled into the machine in operation. In a few seconds, he was dragged and began to spin along with the mechanism, unable to free himself on his own. The scene was desperate and made it clear how dangerous this type of equipment can be when someone enters the risk zone. The force involved does not allow for individual reaction. Fortunately, other employees were paying attention. When they realized what was happening, they immediately ran to help. One of them managed to activate the emergency stop, while the others carefully positioned themselves to remove their colleague without exposing themselves to the same danger. It was moments of great tension, but the quick action prevented something worse. The worker was removed from the equipment alive, visibly shaken, but out of immediate danger. Considering the type of machine and the speed of movement, the outcome could have been tragic. Winding machines do not forgive mistakes. What happened inside a warehouse started in a completely ordinary way, but ended with a hard hit. Some workers arrived carrying a ladder to perform a service in another part of the site. It was something simple, nothing that drew much attention. They leaned the ladder against a nearby point and walked away for a few minutes to get tools or organize the activity. The problem was the way the ladder was left. It was not well positioned or securely supported. It took only a small movement for the ladder to lose balance and fall. The fall was direct. The ladder ended up hitting a woman who was sitting nearby, not imagining that there was any risk above her. The impact caused a huge scare. It was nothing serious, but enough to interrupt the work and draw everyone's attention in the warehouse. It was the kind of accident that happens in seconds, and that afterward, everyone looks at and thinks it could have been easily avoided. No one was running. No one was doing anything dangerous at that moment. The mistake was the lack of attention to a basic detail. Inside a warehouse, the routine continued like on so many other days. Employees packaged products at a steady pace, while forklifts moved through the space to carry loads back and forth. Everything happened at the same time in an environment where attention and coordination needed to go hand in hand at all times. At a certain moment, one of the workers was involved in the packaging process, wrapping plastic around the products. He was doing this with his back to the traffic area, focused only on the task in front of him. The problem is that as he moved backward, a forklift was approaching in reverse down the same aisle. Without noticing the vehicle approaching, the worker ended up being run over by the forklift. The impact was enough to knock him to the ground. The scene caused immediate alarm among those nearby. The forklift was stopped right away, and coworkers ran to provide assistance. The worker was quickly attended to by his colleagues, who checked his condition and activated internal procedures. Despite the scare, the quick response prevented the situation from worsening. Even so, the risk was real and could have had a much worse outcome. Everything happened inside the Bacardi bottling plant in Jacksonville, Florida on the afternoon of August 16, 2012, around 4:30 in the morning. The place seemed to be following its normal routine until a sequence of wrong decisions turned the shift into a nightmare. The machine involved was a palletizer, responsible for stacking boxes of rum onto pallets. The equipment had been malfunctioning for years. Bottles broke frequently, liquid leaked onto the conveyor belt, and everything became slippery. When that happened, boxes collided with each other and more bottles ended up on the floor. That day, the operator was cleaning the machine. In theory, after pressing the emergency button, the next step would be to lock out the system to prevent any restart. There were also safety bars to prevent the platform from descending, but these procedures were almost never used because they slowed down production. Among the employees was Day Davis, wearing an orange vest. He was a temporary worker, and that was the first day of his working life. His shift had started only an hour and a half earlier. Shortly before the accident, he had even sent a photo to his fiancée. He was happy with the new jobs. Seeing shards of glass accumulated, the operator pointed downward and asked Davis to clean the area under the machine. He went down, came back up to ask a question, and went down again. Meanwhile, the operator and the supervisor finished the cleaning from above, closed the safety gate, and turned the equipment back on. The boxes started coming down again. The platform descended with about 60 boxes totaling almost 1 ton. Shortly after, they heard a scream. The emergency button was pressed, but it was already too late. The weight of the machine crushed Davis. Help arrived quickly, but there was nothing more that could be done. This is yet another example of how haste can end up costing a life. Do not forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.